Charles D.B. King of the true Whig Party had been President of Liberia since 1919, and with 2 election victories already, he contested a third against Thomas J. Faulkner. This election was to be remembered as perhaps the most rigged of all time, and it's easy to see why. When the results were announced, it was revealed that President King had secured 96.4% of the vote, a scarcely believable mandate in itself, but whilst Faulkner had convinced 9,000 to vote for him, King boasted 243,000, yet suffrage was a right enjoyed only by the nation's aristocracy. Just 15,000 were eligible. So what happened here? A quip about a president obtaining 1,620% of the vote is interesting, but the context within which the election occurred is worth exploring too. The deeply controversial American Colonization Society was formed in 1816. The ACS encouraged black Americans, many of whom were former slaves, to migrate to Africa. Some within the group argued that black Americans would enjoy more freedom and opportunities in Africa, but others saw freed slaves as a societal problem and a threat to the institution of slavery itself, which at the time formed a vital component of the US economy. The ACS was strongly opposed by virtually all black communities, within which very few had actually been born in Africa or had any real cultural ties to the continent whatsoever. Nonetheless, thousands did emigrate, but they differed immensely from the indigenous people and constructed their own exclusive settlements. Early on, they effectively formed an aristocracy, privileging the small number of themselves over the natives. This group was known as the Americo-Liberians, and they dominated the economic and political spheres of influence. In 1847, the Republic of Liberia, as it was now known, declared independence. The true Whig Party had won every election since 1869 and were the truly dominant force of Liberian politics. In the 1920s, there was significant debate amongst the aristocracy surrounding Liberia's closed-door policy, which forbade foreign money from entering the country. This system operated under the belief that the nation's sovereignty would be safely maintained. Understandable, considering much of the continent was still under European imperial rule. In 1926, however, 1 year before the election, American businessman Harvey Samuel Firestone acquired a 99-year lease from the Liberian government for 1 million acres of land. This was to establish a rubber plantation, which was to become the world's biggest. The deal granted Firestone incredible autonomy, within which included the ability to choose wherever he wanted the plantation to be. Firestone, the opportunist, had granted Liberia a desperately needed $5 million loan with effectively 17% interest. He had almost complete authority over the government's revenues. A year later, President King faced Thomas J. Faulkner in the 1927 Liberian General Election. King's 243,000 votes saw him subsequently re-elected as president for the nation founded by the descendants of freed slaves. In the immediate aftermath, Faulkner sensationally accused the true Whig Party of having facilitated the use of slave labour for Firestone's rubber plantation. The beaten candidate reported to the League of Nations that Firestone had delegated Vice President Allen Yancey the responsibility of providing the 10,000 workers required for the plantation's establishment. He alleged that an arrangement was made, whereby local chiefs would receive 1 cent per worker per day. But the chiefs were under heavy pressure to deliver, and in failing, many had to pawn their wives and children to finance the forced payments. In addition to this, Faulkner showed how whole towns and villages had been destroyed to free up land, and that many young males had fled the area entirely to avoid recruitment. Cuthbert Christie, a British explorer familiar with the African continent, was assigned by the League of Nations to carry out an investigation. The report he produced in 1930 did not detail the true Whig Party as having engaged with slavery, but it did conclude that both President King and Vice President Yancey, among other party leaders, had personally profited from forced labour. This was not limited to within Liberia. They engaged with the trading of forced labour to Fernando Po, a Spanish colony now known as Bioko in modern-day Equatorial Guinea. The report understandably reflected poorly upon the party, so to avoid impeachment, President King and Vice President Yancy both resigned. For King, it started with selling his nation's sovereignty and founding values, and ended in political disgrace. The next election saw Faulkner lose again in 1931, but he had certainly achieved something in removing morally corrupt individuals from government.